So Dan, could you tell us a little bit about the role of the American Councils in Eureka?
American Councils is honored to be a part of the Eureka project and to have taken part in some of the early discussions of the ways in which American institutions and Russian institutions could cooperate long-term in the development of both tech transfer capacity and the strengthening, maybe even the mutual strengthening of our innovation economies that are knowledge-based. And because Russian university culture is historically so strong, and American Councils has had a close relationship with Russian higher education for really almost 40 years, it was sort of a natural kind of interest that we had to, in some ways, raise the bar on the activities and the support of U.S.-Russia exchange that we do. Mm-hmm. And Eureka presents an opportunity to do just that, to sort of go, if we can, beyond projects that are focused on, let's say, development of books, developments of tests, developments of programs, to capacity building in a kind of larger way that would be culturally informed, and at the same time draw on the knowledge and the resources that the U.S. can bring to that. So we saw an interesting opportunity here to build on what we already do reasonably well, and to kind of raise that to the next level in terms of engaging in a serious binational capacity building effort that really benefits both sides.
So you mentioned that there were lots of other projects that the organization has been dealing with, and they were a little bit different from this one. This is a new type.
Right.
So what can you bring in from the experiences and other projects into this?
Sure. On the one hand, I think probably the single largest asset that American Councils has is its relationship with leading universities around the United States. Every university in some way is different. And universities make decisions about engagement, about working with partners, as really people do around the world on the basis of trust. And I think there is that basis of trust between our university partners and American Councils to know that if we recommend a project and invite a university partner to consider being a participant, that it, number one, will be solid, it will be well managed, and it will be academically significant. I think that's the value we add, in some sense, to the relationship, is our ability to really facilitate communications and project development between the two sides. The other asset, I suppose, is just our know-how developed over the last 30 years in the area of bilateral project management. I'm trying to think of a better way to say that, but essentially bilateral collaborative projects. Those are very different things than sort of just taking on a project ourselves and saying, we will do it, right? In some sense, taking it on yourself and saying, you will do it, is a lot easier than having to work in collaboration. Let me give you an example of that. It is one thing for me to write an essay. It's another thing for me to write an essay with my colleague down the hall in the same corridor. Right away, that same project is going to look, feel, and it'll unfold in a different way. Collaborating even with your neighbor or with your colleague in the next office is hard. It takes longer, but one would like to think that the outcome of that collaboration will be different, more interesting, more nuanced in some ways, kind of will present a broader perspective than any single author could necessarily do. But it's difficult to harmonize, it's difficult to keep it in alignment, and it's difficult and sometimes to even agree what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the goal is. So I think there are two issues: the assets of American partner institutions, the knowledge of how Russian-American collaboration can work, and our track record of successful collaboration over these many years in the area of higher education means that we have a lot of contacts in Russia. We know a lot of the models that will work and will be culturally acceptable in a Russian context and also be rational and reasonable to an American. And I think that's the set of assets that we bring to this. Our staff are multilingual, bicultural, tricultural. They have the same deep experience you see across the organization. We have a very talented group of people working in our Moscow, our Novosibirsk, St. Petersburg, Vladivostok offices. So we are on the ground in Russia. We build our experience not based on some recollection of how things used to be in Russia, but actually how things are right now.
Sure. In your view, what are the most obvious synergies between the Russian and American universities that have been determined during those 2 days that universities spent?
This is a really good question, because while we had done capacity mapping and needs analysis of the Russian and American partners, what was striking, I think, for all of us in the course of this conference was the extent to which the universities identified very similar areas as important. That's the first thing, because you don't begin with what necessarily is easy. You begin with what would be important to accomplish. And I think that agreement across the ocean and across institutional boundaries about what is likely to be a priority for either side when you ask them this question, I thought that was pretty interesting. And we saw that today in the multiple presentations that occurred of tentative module project, call it modular project development, where there was quite a bit of coincidence of arrangement of priorities. And one of the things that I guess that jumped out at me was the importance of developing and strengthening relationships with industrial groups and business networks. How do you develop stakeholders that are not in the university? And that's not what universities used to think about, right? That maybe some of the most important stakeholders are not here, they're somewhere else. And that's an odd thing for any institution to think about. Secondly is the sort of sense that came out very strongly in a number of the presentations that this is ultimately a cultural and educational issue, that developing a culture of entrepreneurship is not so much about setting up an office and hiring a so-and-so, a patent specialist and a licensed officer, but is actually also about creating a desire and an interest in entrepreneurship in the youngest cohort of the university, the sort of the entering freshmen, the sophomores, the juniors, these sort of undergraduates, that they would want to be part of this, and they may in some ways be closest of all to the kind of mainstream of thinking of where the innovation is going to resist. So the issue is, number one, don't block it, right? And number two, capture that and nurture it. I think the third thing that comes out, if I were, let's say, I put on my Russian hat, if I were a Russian attending this, it would be to disabuse myself of the notion of predetermination, of predestination. That is not that some nations and some peoples are just naturally entrepreneurial and others are not, right? What you can see is that Americans invest heavily in the education of entrepreneurial instincts, entrepreneurial habits, right, in young people. Purdue University brings in 8th graders and 6th graders and 11th graders, young kids from the local schools, and talks to them about Discovery Park and about inventions and about innovation. That this is not something you just sit back and wait to happen or you order people to go out and do, but rather this is something that's nurtured from the very earliest stages, and you keep doing it. And one of the things that struck me today was that a number of our partners suggested that there is very much a kind of, if you will, pedagogical, youth-focused thing here, that entrepreneurship and tech transfer is not just about high-end business, right? It's actually about kids.
Absolutely,
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Are there any other organizations that are participating in the project in Eureka?
There are some remarkable groups, and I may not be able to remember the exact name of every one of them here, but in addition to our 5 Russian university partners, 2 hubs and 3 resource centers, 3 in Moscow and 2 regional hubs, we also have the 4 American universities that competed in the competition and to be designated. There were 4 out of 14 that competed, and there are also a group of associations that are very, very much a part of the commercialization and entrepreneurship ecosystem in this country. And we see the association of tech managers as being a critical professional group that sets the standards and mines the professional qualifications and collects the data, does what professional associations only can do. Mm-hmm. In other words, there's certain things universities do very well. There's certain other things that professional associations do. And you need them both. Mm-hmm. And for that sense, we had them both in the project from the very beginning. This is not an afterthought. AUTM was actually one of the participating partners that came in on this project. But through our connections with the Association of American University Research Parks, with the incubator group, with the entrepreneurship group, and with the venture capitalists, you just spoke with one here earlier today, mm-hmm. you see the way venture capital is distributed in this country in a rather remarkable, layered, and highly sophisticated way, where the angels reside, who deals with which level of risk, where the venture capitalists step in, where the market finally steps in, and who pays for that first stage when nobody's around to do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are kind of the issues that American universities wrestle with a lot. Some of our institutions, like the University of Michigan, have actually set up their own venture funds so that they don't have to rely only on external funders, on donors and venture capitalists, but can actually invest university money mm-hmm. in a project they believe is particularly promising before they sell it or hand it off to the next level of financial supporter, mm-hmm. so that the universities get compensated. In other words, they get compensated for mm-hmm. and they lose money on the ones that don't. Mm-hmm. And that's fair.
Sure. Is there any other organization that assists American councils in putting these ideas and making the project work in Russia?
Right. We have a principal partner in the sense, to the extent that American Councils works on the U.S. and the North American side, and in close connection with the Russian partners. The principal Russian partner is our colleagues is the new Eurasia Foundation in Moscow, headed by Andrei Tortunov, who's both a longtime friend and a valued colleague and associate. And I think this is probably exactly as it should be, that the balance and the management of the Russian side of the Eureka project needs to be in Russia. Mm-hmm. and needs to be in the hands of a Russian partner. I don't think I could imagine the project being done in any other way. We happen to have an office in Moscow, and our office is represented there in some of the management decisions, but fundamentally the Russian side is managed by the Russians, the American side is managed by the American side, mm-hmm. and I think that makes just ultimately good sense, both in terms of laws, legislation, accounting systems, mm-hmm. and communication.
Mm-hmm. And the funder is
the funder, U.S.-Russia Foundation, is really a new foundation that has, in my view, come up with just a remarkable concept. In some sense, it's a concept that builds on a lot of the earlier developmental initiatives that have been undertaken by our governments, by the Russian, but particularly by the American government, by the World Bank. You see, in some sense, in this level of investment in this sophisticated kind of project, you see a really good example of how a donor can learn from all that's gone before, mm-hmm. and in some senses take some of the best experience and take that on to the next level. And I think American Council is very honored to be part of that process. And the vision of that foundation is very much a critical part of this, that willingness as a private foundation to take a bit of a chance on a project that's very complicated, that is not guaranteed to produce any quick results, mm-hmm. But is likely over time to change the landscape.
Thank you so much for your comments. I appreciate it.